we're going to leap right into the sexual revolution, because back in the 50s and 60s, starting the 50s and really coming to fruition in the 60s, there was a change in the relationship between men and women. People point to easy-to-access contraception, including the contraceptive pill, as freeing up women to live their sexual lives with abandon, much like men had done down the ages, unless they had a particular religious conviction, or, for other reason, they kept themselves in check. The most common reason, because they loved a particular woman and they had to keep themselves in check. The example of the ages is that women are a civilizing effect on men. But apart from that, men indulge themselves sexually and have done down the ages. Women less so, but now they could live the same lives
I'm glad
that
you
men
said
did.
less so. I think there were equally women who wanted to indulge themselves, but they had to find an appropriate man.
That's true, but if you were a wealthy woman, there were ways to do it, and there are examples of that. But just generally speaking, men are the more promiscuous of the two sexes. I don't think anyone questions that.
Would disagree, no.
But the sexual revolution, well, that seemed to free up women. I say seem to because I'm referring to a book by Louise Perry called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, and we here are referring to a review of it by Ian Paul, published in September. And he draws out from her book particularly this example right at the start of her book. She uses, says Ian Paul, she uses Hugh Hefner, he founded the Playboy magazine, and Marilyn Monroe, famous actress, as twin poles of the sexual revolution. A winner and a loser, male and female, and the contention is that actually the sexual revolution, freeing up women to be more sexually active as their choice, was actually bad for women. Hugh Hefner was a progressive on things like abortion rights and contraception. Of course, that benefited him.
Yes.
Not just him personally, but his business.
Yes.
He lost the risk of unwanted pregnancy in women if he had sex with them. But the sexual revolution, Marilyn Monroe was being part of it. It's reported that she had affairs, as well as marriages. She was the first ever cover star in Hefner's magazine, for which she was paid $500. Not much compared with how much he made from it. And this affected her. Because she was on display, if you like, on this cover, she felt humiliated by it throughout her life, commented on that, and she ended up with a life of substance abuse, multiple abortions, and depression. But Hugh Hefner just partied throughout his life and lived a great and opulent lifestyle. What I'm reporting is the comment on the sexual revolution by Louise Perry in her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. Does that ring true for you, Beryl? Are men the winners and women the losers?
For the most part, I suppose 75% I would agree. It's only just occurred to me in you talking about it that maybe men were expecting that women who were not married and not attached to anybody would take on board contraception just to save themselves from pregnancy. That thought had never occurred to me before. In the 1960s, I was in my 20s, and I saw contraception as a way of regulating your family. But then I never thought of it being used by single people so as to avoid being impregnated by a man who they didn't want to marry, who they didn't want to be attached to. Yes, it's an interesting question.
The book doesn't stop there. It covers quite a few different topics to do with this. It goes through quite a few of the ramifications of this sexual revolution. It changed how we view rape, because rape historically was always seen as a sexual sin. Even violent rape, it was brought on by sexual urges. But it's now seen generally as an attempt to control women. It's an exercise of power over women. Now, it always was that as well, of course.
Yes.
But it's a sexual act.
Yes.
And that's been taken away, and the belief is that boys are conditioned to behave in that way. There is, to use a modern phrase, a rape culture. Our culture is a rape culture.
The phrase used when I was at that age, in my 20s, was to sow your wild oats.
Now, the sow your wild oats idea was men doing it. The sexual revolution meant that they could. But was this good for them? There's a few problems she outlines. One is, as soon as you start saying sex is not just for the confines of marriage between a man and a woman, you start to ask the question, well, what are the limits then? And she records that if a man wants to have a sex with a dead chicken, there should be nothing to stop him. In the 1968 revolution in Paris, it says, it is forbidden to forbid. But you can go further. What about incest?
Yes.
What about paedophilia? So she's saying, at what point do you rein in sexual desires and urges? She refers to pornography, what was part of this free expression. What we now call sex work or prostitution is then thought of as a profession you can go into.
Yes.
Whereas the effect that this has happened with women, but survey after survey finds that over time women have become more depressed, more dissatisfied with life, just generally in the Western world. So whatever the causes of that, sexual freedom hasn't made them happier.
So I wonder then if women, as part of their psychosexual makeup, still believe that they should be approached as a gentler sex, one who should be treated more reasonably by men as a partner in a contract.
Yeah.
Rather than a willing vessel, if you like.
Yes. Now, Perry, in her book, does, in the final chapter, come up with her solution to all these issues of sexual freedom causing these problems, and that is the perhaps surprising, but to us not surprising, conclusion that the best way is to go back to traditional marriage. And the traditional marriage solves the difficult problems in society that we've seen raising up. Human beings are constrained by their biologies. This disparity of the differences between men and women causes a problem, what she calls dependency. But if you value freedom, women should be free to do what they want above all else, then you end up rejecting the role that women most want to play, the role of motherhood, because that creates even more dependency in the form of a child. So you have this interrelation dependency, the man looking after the woman looking after the children. Marriage provides a stable basis for all this. I think the problem is that people look at bad marriages that go wrong and say, you see, that means marriages are bad. It doesn't necessarily mean that, of course. It can just mean that was a bad marriage. Now, according to Perry, she says that according to anthropologists, monogamous marriage is successful in pushing men away from the cad mode. Who's that actor with the moustache in the old films who used to say, ding dong?
Right.
He was chatting up some pretty young woman, and he would say, ding dong. Perhaps, gentle listener, you let us know. Just go to berylandpete.com. You can leave us a comment. Who was that who said ding dong? He's a cad, this person. A cad, then, is someone who plays the field, who wants to have lots of sexual relationships. Monogamous marriage pushes men away from that and pushes them from cad mode to dad mode. I like that phrase because it rhymes.
Does it always, though?
It can't always, because men have affairs.
Because I can think of a few cases that have been described in the newspapers, in the media, that even though they may become fathers, it still doesn't push them away from being cad.
Yes, that's true, but this is not an argument for men becoming fathers, because they often do that. This is an argument for them having a traditional marriage, when they make their vows before God, when they are committed to the marriage. She's calling that dad mode because in that position you can become a good father.
Right.
You can become a dad in the technical sense. You father a child. You have sex. You father a child. But this is talking about the context. Just, reporting what she's saying.
Yes.
I think to that extent she's right. I mean, marriage can't be perfect because people aren't perfect. But the point being made is that throughout history, people have always gone back to this idea of marriage. For most people, it's between one man and one woman, although wealthier men have had several wives. And in Old Testament times of the Jews, some people would have several wives, and this was allowed by God, but the ideal, right back from the time of Genesis, is that it was one man and one woman. A woman will leave her family and cleave to her husband, one flesh, husband and wife. That's the ideal, and it seems that throughout history people have returned to that. But even if men were having more than one wife, it was still in a marriage in which you were committed to each other. There's more than one wife, but there was a limit set on sexual behaviour. So the question is then, what good did come out of the sexual revolution? Did anything good come out of it? In the 70s and even in the 80s, we were expecting people to be married, and the sexual revolution took, I think, longer to reach other places, and perhaps the outskirts of Birmingham was one of them, where I was.
Yes, our society seems to be conditioned into thinking, and of course in this they actually agree with the Bible that it is not good for human beings to be alone.
No.
But by our human nature, very often we are trapped into affairs that we didn't expect, just for the sake of not wanting to be alone.
I see that, yes. Just talking about the good that marriage does, I was thinking of that movement, the Me Too movement, it was known
Yes.
as, in which women stood up and said they were abused by various people. It highlighted the problem of consent. You need to consent to any sexual act. When this was at its height, during the Harvey Weinstein scandal and that sort of time, a few years ago, many commentators said, well, do you know there is a solution to this? How do you know when someone consented to having sex? Well, what they do is you have a big religious ceremony, and you say, I do. In order to have sex, you have to get married to them. Mm-hmm. And then certain people would say, yes, but even within marriage, people can behave badly.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, of course they can, but once you're in a marriage relationship, everyone knows you're in that relationship, right?
Yes.
So although things can go badly, there's at least more of a chance that people will notice that something's wrong. More so than in a casual encounter where
Yes.
you don't even know the person that well. And in some cases, don't even know the person. So it's a system which has worked well down the years. And so maybe Perry's right to point out that we abandon marriage at our peril.
Yes, we are arguing on that premise, yes.
Yes. But the sexual revolution, was it bad, completely bad for women? I think that it wasn't. I think that giving women more confidence to be able to say, for example, what about my sexual needs? I like things like this.
But you can say no.
The idea of saying no, which needs to be included in marriage, I think is a good one. In the area where I work, violence within marriage was a real problem, mainly caused by the men drinking too much. Women being able to stand up against that is a good thing. So I think the Me Too movement had something good to say, and I think the sexual revolution of the 60s does something good, but the abandonment of marriage was a bad thing.
Yes. I'm thinking of the old joke at the moment. You can take him to the altar, but you can't alter him.
Oh,
Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
Do you know that?
I know that, yes. The question is it an alter him, H-Y-M-N, or H-I-M? Yeah, that's right. I think the main thing about getting married that I think people forget is it's absolutely vital that you get married to the right person.
Yeah.
You don't always have much of a choice, of course, but as far as possible, you need to try and make a selection of who you're going to marry.
Yes.
And not to get married if the choice is someone maybe you don't feel safe with.
It's not always possible to tell.
No, true, but I'm saying that's a good starting point.
Yes, it is a good starting point.
You see, it doesn't stop there with marriage. There's marriage, then there's the wider family and wider community, and I would say community of the church, within which marriages sit, where there's more and more accountability levels, such that if there is an issue, a wife, for example, should feel comfortable telling maybe the pastor of the church, but maybe simply the other women in the church if there's a problem. Not generally, because it would just get spread around, but people she trusts. And so having a community of people around the marriage in which the marriage sits as a unit is important. You can't have a successful marriage in isolation like that, because then you've got no context in which to fit and you don't have accountability for how you behave. So it isn't just marriage, it's marriage within the whole of society. But the whole of society needs to make a shift if it's going to support marriage. Mm-hmm. And marriage does seem to be the answer to some of the issues that have sprung up in terms of women feel unhappy and women being badly served by the sexual revolution because they didn't want to be like men in the first place. Why would you? What do you think, Norman? Norman is a man.
And he's also my husband.
I can ask for his opinion.
It's huge and complex, isn't it? Marriage is a partnership between two people. The whole gay and even the transsexual and the changing of sex is all part of an ongoing difficulty that the world has, because in the beginning God created man and woman, and we've gone miles away from a permanent relationship between one man and one woman for the sake of continuing society through childbearing. It's a big, big, complicated world, and I just don't understand where it's going, but it seems to be getting more and more complicated. Although, actually, I will very, very happily say that Beryl and I are coming up to our 56 years in a few weeks' time, and we're still working it out and doing pretty well, I think. But Beryl might say otherwise.
No, I would agree.
It's interesting looking back on the sexual revolution, all that started. Perhaps it goes back further as well, as many people argue.